Namaskar. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is with immense pleasure that I welcome you all to our 17th Sustainability Summit. It is indeed an honor and privilege to welcome all of you to the session on Climate Action Road to Net Zero. I welcome all our distinguished speakers of the session who are here with us today. I now request our moderator, Mr. Jamshed Godrej, past President CII and Chairman and Managing Director, Godrej Envoys Manufacturing Company Limited, who has joined us virtually to please initiate the session. Thank you.
Thank you. My greetings to everyone. It gives me great pleasure to address this gathering at this session on climate action, the road to net zero, at the 17th Sustainability Summit, Building a Sustainable Tomorrow and Transforming Risks into Opportunities. Let me take a moment to welcome the panel. Mr. Suvjoy Sengupta, partner at McKinsey & Company. Mr. Krishna Mohan Pubada, Regional President of Novozymes, India. Dr. Lognesh Channa, Vice President, Government Affairs, Asia Pacific and Japan of SAP. And Mr. Nitin Prasad, who is Chairman of CII's Cleaner Air, Better Life initiative, and also the Chairman of Shell in India. So just a few words to set the context here. I think we have all been witnessing extreme events around the world, whether in India, in Europe, in the USA. I think that the weather is really becoming significantly critical in terms of how climate change is changing the weather. And even though there may be some scientific issues around that, there's no doubt that everyone in the world, in one way or another, is experiencing this change. Of course, as you know, the Paris goal was to stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade increase in temperature by the end of the century. But we seem to be on track to go ahead of that. But I would say that COP26 in Glasgow really did try to tackle the climate crisis. And now, it's quite important to see that 190 countries have set targets to cut emissions and keep them within the 1.5 degree, if it's at all possible. But also that a very large number of countries, including India, have made a commitment to net zero by 2050, 2060, 2070 for India. So there's no doubt that we are making progress. I always like to say that even though 2070 is 50 years out from here, if you don't start now, it will become too late if you start a little too late. So there's no doubt at all in my mind that we have to take climate action and do it quickly. I think most of the leading companies in India are moving in that direction. They are employing such initiatives as science-based targets and using and making commitments for various efficiency factors and ways to reduce carbon and decarbonize their processes. There's no doubt that there are some very large industrial sectors which are not easy to decarbonize. And we know that steel, cement, fertilizers, etc., are among them. But, it's an industry-wide problem. It's not a problem that is not going to affect anyone. It will affect practically every industrial sector. So with that, I just want to talk a little bit about a launch of a program that we will be doing now. It is the carbon capture, utilization and storage working group launch that we will do. Mr. Nitin Prasad has kindly agreed to chair this group. And just a word on this, we've all heard of carbon capture and storage, It's an issue that has been around for a long time. We also know that it's not easy to do. It is one of those things that is essential but difficult to do. But I'm sure that with innovation and a determination, we will be able to move in that direction. The whole world has to move in that direction. I don't think it's just about India, it's the whole world. And uh, so let me say that today, we have this session to launch this effect, and I would like to invite Mr. Nitin Prasad to speak about this initiative, and then maybe I'll just have a chat with him, and then we'll move on with the rest of the panel. Mr. Prasad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Godrej. Let me firstly begin by thanking Mr. Godrej for being part of our launch. It's really an honor, sir, to have you be a part of this stream. CCUS as a topic has been a conversation point, as Mr. Godrej has pointed out, for a long time, and it features very much in the IPCC reports. It features in the IEA reports and others that have been done. As we focus, and quite rightly, as we focus as a country, as a world, as a society, on the immediate sort of things that we need to come back and do, renewable energy and even operations efficiency, green hydrogen, bios alternatives. The reality is that for a number of different sectors, at some point in time, we cannot avoid the fact that there is still emissions that have to be captured and sunk, and we have to come back and deal with them. In some sectors, for example, in cement, that may be as high as 40-50% of the emissions that's associated with a particular cement plant, or even for that matter, even in steel and aluminum and other sort of sectors, where the reality is that without some form of capture technology, we are not going to be able to meet the net zero applications going forward. So we see CCUS as Shell as being a necessary part of the solution. I think it has been recognized by a number of documents, a number of thought leadership and knowledge partners as also being a part of the solution. And in terms of creating the right level of urgency, it is time for us to start to move forward in taking this, in executing what a CCUS solution can look like. Now, CCUS has two parts to it, actually has multiple parts to it, and perhaps maybe it's good to sort of just quickly say why is it important for us to start to deal with some of this. The carbon capture side, arguably there's some fantastic technology that's available from a number of different individuals that would allow us to come back and capture the carbon. The reality is, what do you do with it? And here is where the bifurcation comes in pretty fast. In the utilization space, the reality is that while technologies are available, and we've heard the whole list that has come in, most of the technologies at this point in time that are viable or technologically or commercially viable largely will translate what is a scope 1, scope 2 emission into a scope 3 emission. But it does not actually embed the CO2 in a manner that actually sinks it in a life cycle, on a life cycle basis. So still an important part of the solution space going forward, but we should recognize that in that solution space, it has a limited scope as it is today, and it needs further technological development to really take it into other utilization cases, which will effectively eliminate the carbon from the atmosphere to begin with. Storage, of course, is a less technologically challenged solution. There are 27 plants that are already in operations today out of 135 projects globally. It's still a small fraction of what needs to be done. And our own estimation was that India has the potential, or will need to think about at least 0.4 gigatons worth of storage potential as we go forward. But storage, of course, has its own sort of challenges. You can't just simply drill a hole in the ground and put CO2 into it. I'm being a bit facetious, but the reality is that you have to have the ability to take a look at the subsurface and understand what is available. You have to actually build in the infrastructure to be able to shift it to that location. And of course, what we need to be able to do, much in the way some of the other technologies in the past have tried to deal with this, we must be able to build confidence in society and in the populations that are around some of these storage sites, that when we put it in, it stays in the ground. And that's a little bit of a harder challenge to come back and do, because that is an essential part of how we can possibly go forward in terms of engaging the community to take this forward. So we think that the CCUS coalition is a tremendous step forward. I'm very proud and honored to have been asked to come back and chair it, and we're very happy to come back and try and define how do we take this forward. There is a number of activity that we must come back and do, not just from a policy and regulatory point of view, from having a consistent approach to carbon pricing. In terms of how we execute that, some SOPs and how do you actually come back and develop them, demonstration pilots, plans and projects, but equally broad-based awareness, as I just spoke about, and understanding about what CCUS will be able to come back and do, so that we bring community and society along with us. And finally, of course, the ever-present financing question that sort of pervades anything having to do in climate change and technology. A number of different activities that I think we will jointly come back and lead. But the one consistent thing that I can come back and say is that none of this will happen if we don't collaborate well together. If we don't have government, society, all of our partners coming and working on this together, because this will require us to come back and create a whole new value chain, a whole new sector, a whole new industry, which of course has plenty of opportunity in terms of job creation, economic livelihood creation, as well as establishing India as almost a market leader in this space. But that has in order to be able to create a new sector, you of course need a large number of players to come together to be able to do that. And again, that is the genesis of why we think a coalition is absolutely important. So with that, let me pause and only sort of come and thank again Mr. Godrej for his very strong support and contribution to this, but also in a number of thought leaders and partners, Niti Aayog as a knowledge partner, OGCI and IIT Bombay, amongst others, and of course a very warm welcome to others who want to come and engage on this incredibly important topic for the future going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitin. Really appreciate your leadership in this effort. And I'll just ask you one question before we move on with our panelists. The shell companies are known very well for doing scenarios and working on pathways, etc. What's the most optimistic scenario that Shell has worked on carbon capture and storage?
Well, thank you. I think we have done a tremendous amount of work in terms of scenarios. We have also done scenarios for India, in specific global as well as in India. We did come in and also posit that it was possible for us to think about a nearer term 2050 aspiration for a net zero. And many of those things I think have been captured very well in terms of the roadmap that was forward. And I'm only making this comment because I think there's a lot of discussion about the 2070 target that's out there. And as you mentioned, it's 5 decades out. But I think that almost loses sight a little bit to what the 2030 targets actually are. And here I think we as a country and as a government has shown remarkable leadership in setting quite extensive 2030 targets in terms of what we will come back and deliver, that we have now, of course, sent in as our updated NDCs. And there is a program that in the next 5 years we may potentially have to ratchet them up again in terms of what that's going forward. When we looked at this and we talked about the pace of activity and what was needed in the next decade, the next 10 years into the 2030s, and it was very clear that we must come back and focus on carbon capture, CCUS technology. We must demonstrate within the next 10 years at a minimum 5 to 10 projects in the country, because that's the start of a business industry that must go forward. And if you take a look at the broader numbers, if we are not able to achieve at least 0.4 gigatons to 0.6 gigatons in the 2050 timeframe of capture, then we will be quite a ways away of actually being able to deliver a net zero, even in a 2070 credible timeframe. So really quite critical that we come back and take that forward. And the last sort of comment I'll make on this of course is I think there is a tremendous view that that some of these things are limit our capacity or our growth as an economy and as industrial activity. Actually, I think the narrative there needs to change quite a bit, because if we don't switch to seeing this as an enabler for growth in industrial activity, what we will quickly find is that we will escalate industrial emissions to a point that is completely unsustainable and end up building a large number of assets where we will have to then retrospectively come back and adjust, in terms of how do we bring the emissions of that down. We'll also find very quickly in a world that is fast focusing on decarbonization, and if we have our aspirations for exports and things like that, that if we don't come back and take these technologies forward, then we'll struggle. So those are conservative estimates that our scenarios came back and suggested that would be important for India's economic development, but also to come back and deliver the 2050.
Thank you, Nitin. That was very useful. We'll come to the topic of our session today, which is the path to net zero. And I'm going to request and invite each of the panelists to speak for 3-4 minutes on their take on what are the challenges and opportunities for India's path to net zero. And may I start with Mr. Puvada?
Thank you, and thank you the organizers, CII, for this opportunity. I think a very, very important topic to net zero. I think the whole world and everybody is talking about the impact and the corrective steps that we need to take. And when we look in terms of India, and definitely India is sort of trying to make a mark, a footprint in terms of increased manufacturing. And this is great. Increased manufacturing also would mean that we need to be quite responsible in terms of the pace that we adopt. So the new manufacturing should come with technologies with low carbon pathways. Now, India has done extremely well in terms of the renewable energy side, but the path towards decarbonization will also have, we need to see it from a much broader and much bigger canvas. While the focus will be very clear in terms of the hard-to-abate sectors, but I think from Novozymes' perspective, we are an industrial biotech company. We see that biotech as an alternative, as an option, will be a clear enabler in multiple areas. It'll actually open doors, and I'd like to quote a few examples on what possibilities biotech can bring in. And just try to think in terms of a couple of examples that I want to bring. So if you look in terms of agriculture, if 10% of the agriculture will reduce or replaced with from the chemical pesticides, you replace 10% with biologicals. Now, that would mean 250 million tons of carbon dioxide savings on an annual basis. The second example that I would like to bring in is if 10% of animal protein was to be replaced by alternate proteins or fermented-based proteins, that would mean that we release 50% of arable land in EU. Now, this is huge, right? So we can go on. Another example, which is possibly on everyday usage, if we're looking at detergents, a simple product that we use in everyday life, and if you try to bring in bio-based detergents, That would mean that we are reducing 10 million tons of effluent chemical release every minute. Now, this is big, right? We can go on with multiple examples of these kinds. So the point I want to bring in is that there are alternates, there are newer technologies, newer pathways that we need to look at, and plenty of opportunities are there. Now, when we look in terms of biotech, biotech can be a very, very strong enabler for industry to adopt, take in, and then thrive. I also think that it is an opportunity for a future perspective that we look into the future with a new lens. Now, when we look from a past perspective and you look at industrial revolution, we've essentially generated a lot of wealth, but that also has come at a cost. And I think the future that's lying ahead of us need to be more bio-based, more natural, and also more sustainable. So I think the path to the future will clearly also force governments, policymakers, society, industry, consumer to look at practices, to look at the choices that we are making and adopt better practices. At Novozymes, we believe that the solutions to the complex problems can actually be found in nature, can actually be found in small cells, small microbes, and we think that can be a key to a larger door that can open up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Puwada. May I now request Dr. Channa to speak on the same sort of topic of the opportunities and pathways to net zero?
Thank you so much. Indeed, an honor to be with you, Mr. Godrej, and thank you, CII, for inviting and this opportunity. What I intend doing in the next 3 to 4 minutes is to draw the attention of the need to have an interwoven approach of digital technologies with the sustainable initiatives. That to me would be one of the important components as we take the path to net zero. We have heard since morning about the need for everyone, each one of us sitting in this room, to focus on sustainability. The why part has been clear to us for quite some time. The what part also is more or less clear as to what we need to do, whether it's carbon storage, capture, or the electric vehicles and all. More important to would be the discussion on the how part, and that's where is the focus that I want to bring in. And when I say the how part and integrating digital with this, the impact that sustainability asks is making on technology solutions is visible. We see 79% of the buyers today are changing their preferences because they want to buy sustainable products. We see more than 600 voluntary and regulatory ESG standards now in place, and we estimate that by 2024 of the professionally managed assets will be in ESG mode. So that's the changing landscape, and not only it's changing from an ask from a consumer perspective, but it also changing from the geopolitical perspective. And come 2023, the EU's CBAM, or the carbon-based adjustment, would require all of us sitting in this room to actually report what we are doing in terms of the carbon, CO2 and other emissions, and that is also commonly known as the carbon tax that we hear. So from a geopolitical perspective, also things are moving towards that direction. So that's happening on one side. On the other side, we see the developments in the digital space, and some of the pioneering initiatives that we have taken in this country are a true example and true validation of the fact that once we start doing, whether it's fintech in terms of almost total elimination and saving of cash handling that we have been able to proven, that we saw in terms of digitization of the 1.3 billion Aadhaars. So we have done enough on the digital also, and concerns around privacy, concerns around security, in terms of the digital maturity of society, the digital skilling, inclusion. All this we have taken enough steps in terms of creating a regulatory, in terms of creating a an enabling ecosystem to do that. Now, so where is the challenge? The challenge that continues is sustainability efforts and digital efforts still continue to be the parallel domains. What I am proposing is the merger, the reason being with the digital technologies as a horizontal prescription in the efforts towards sustainability, it brings in one, the basic requirement of data transparency. Second, I can measure and manage what I'm trying to set forward. And third, again, as an example, Nitin mentioned about scope one, scope two. Very simple for me to even do a scope one, scope two assessment. When I talk about scope three, and that's where is the bigger challenge. And we have now technology as business networks. Say, for example, look at our solutions like Ariba, where the suppliers are on this, and I can actually relate and find out what could be the scope three that is coming onto me. So that's quite possible as we move forward. The approach that we are suggesting, so one can say that it is, if it is so simple, why is that it is so slow? Current focus obviously remains on getting maturity on the operational technologies, whether it's renewables, whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's charging infrastructure, whether it's the business technologies or the information technologies are, actually are getting merged very soon as we see it. What is then we need to do? The best way is embed these sustainability metrics into the business process metrics itself. We have spoken enough about the top line, the bottom line. I think now as an outcome, the green line should also come out. And that's where the importance of technology, even if it means starting as a more of a compliance initiatives, like in India, now we have BRSR. So even if it means reporting in an automated fashion or the compliance initiative, I think that will be a big starting point. Now, the larger point is how do we take it forward? Maybe this is a program that needs to get created to ensure that everything that we do around this is supported as a digital as a foundation. And all of us have actually reached a maturity in our organization in terms of creating insights using data. We now need to take the next leap on to using this data to the analytics, dashboarding, and merging it with the sustainability ask. And the good part, as we move on this path, the solution development, the solution integration, and the technology roadmap is pretty clear and available. And hence, it should be easy as we move forward in terms of integrating that. Thank you very much, Mr. Godre.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chanana. I think you've clearly highlighted some of the tools that will be very useful as we move towards net zero. So may I now request and invite Mr. Sengupta to give his thoughts on moving to net zero and the opportunities that he sees there.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I wanted to take a few minutes, build on what the other panelists have said in the context of a study that McKinsey has been working on over the last 8 to 10 months on a decarbonization roadmap for India. And Nitin rightly said that 2070 is 50 years out. Can there be a more aggressive aspiration for India? And the starting point for us was to say that, look, if you imagine the India of 2070, actually 85% of that India hasn't been built yet, right? So if you take power or cement or steel, we will see a 6 to 8x increase in demand, which means we have an immense opportunity to build it right the first time, rather than retrofitment, what we see in US and Europe and other places. We've got this fantastic once in a lifetime opportunity, once in a generation opportunity to get it right the first time. And we took that lens to say, what opportunities does that open up, right? In India's context, if you see the emissions, there are 5 sectors, which is power, cement, steel, transportation, and agriculture, that account for about 70% of the emissions in all. And we went into those details to see what can be practically done, what's already being done, what are the levers that are available for accelerating the journey towards net zero. Now, if you take a 2070 view, the total size of the kind of the carbon space let's say India decarbonizes till 2070, so carbon space is about 200 gigatons that we are creating. If we go to 2070, another 80 to 90 additional gigatons of carbon space is created. So it is substantial in terms of decarbonization. But then we try to also say what are the economic benefits to the country. And, I won't go into all the details, but forex savings, if you take the amount of crude oil that's being imported, gas that's being imported, coking coal for steel, solar modules, etc. And that's like a massive number, $1.7 trillion of forex savings. OPEX savings, so things like logistics cost, energy cost, there is a saving that emerges out of that. Real opportunity to mobilize investments in many of these areas to create green manufacturing hubs. And in things like CCUS and green hydrogen, can India take a kind of technology leadership role and emerge as one of the top 3 countries in leading the way? So, we say that, look, roughly if you say that's like 80 to 85% of this problem can be addressed through 7 levers. One is renewable energy, green hydrogen, CCUS. Circularity is a very large one. I think the earlier session was talking about circularity, electric mobility, and then nature-based solutions and sustainable agriculture. So we've kind of gone into a bit of detail around that. Now, that 2 or 3 challenges that obviously come. One is capital. Now, the requirement of capital, what we're saying, what would take in its normal natural course, say 50 years, we're trying to compress in 30 years. So there's a real need to front load capital into this process. So I take the example of steel, right? And there's H2 DRI, which is using green hydrogen on a DRI route. That's kind of what is seen as the next horizon for decarbonization of steel. Now, as per our estimates, if we leave it just to normal evolution of the technology, it will be around 2040 to 2045, where the H2 DRI route becomes economically viable in India, in the absence of any incentives and so on. Now, can we, and by that time, so 2022 to 2045, demand for steel is increasing in India. We will need to invest more. Actually, then we put up blast furnace-based projects, which again, Nitin mentioned, many of them will become stranded assets maybe 30 or 40 years down the line. So that's not in a capital constrained economy like India, that's not a very sensible thing to do. So then we played out a scenario to say, if we actually put, for example, a $50 per ton carbon price on steel, and we incentivize the green hydrogen development and try to accelerate how the green hydrogen cost down comes, is the benefit of that. And then, it shows that India can become a leader in green steel. Obviously, there's a cost to that. The cost of steel goes up a little bit in the short term, etc. But this kind of little bit, the non-linear thinking in that we've kind of taken each of those steps. And overall, we are coming out very enthused about what this is showing, that there's a 2050 decarbonization pathway is possible. Of course, it's a lot of work, as I said, on the capital side. Even a 2070 decarbonization takes something like a $7.2 trillion of investment. And accelerated decarbonization takes another $5 trillion of investment. So about innovation in the financial markets on how to front load that capital and get to pay for some of the benefits. Then we looked at all the technologies that are required, and the positive thing is about 70 to 75% of that investment is already in the money, like in solar energy, or we see in the next years or so can come in the money. It's only about the 25 to 30% where some viability gap funding or innovation is required to bridge that gap. So again, it is kind of mission possible. Finally, we are concluding with sort of 10 bold actions. We need to think in a step change fashion and disruptive fashion. So I won't go into all of the details of those, but a few of those I wanted to mention here. Accelerating the development of carbon markets, that's seen as a big enabler for India. India has already made some announcements in this regard, a compliance market, but a strong sort of voluntary market and innovation around that. Concept of a green transition bank, the kind of the financing delta that we are expecting, that's going to be a big enabler. Carbon capture is an important element of this, and we are proposing 3 to 5 CCUS hubs around the country. So one could be in the eastern part of the country where there's a lot of steel and power production, and you use that as a hub kind of model. A national circularity mission, I think this is one of the most underestimated and underleveraged sources. And it's not just about decarbonization, but when we see solar modules, batteries, many other things that will require, can India become a hub for recycling and circularity, not just for India, but for other regions. One more point that came through was efficient use of land, because all of this is going to agriculture, solar, etc. It's going to require a lot of land. So more a strategic national land use plan. So these are some of the examples of, we have in 10 actions. We'll release the report in about 4 to 5 weeks time. But I thought of, using this forum to share some of the key highlights of that. So net, I think very excited that many aspects, even if we can't get to all the way to a net zero by 2050, this is a real opportunity for India to take the lead, create value, and I'm sure there are 100 green unicorns that can be spawned out of this in terms of value creation in India and globally.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sen Gupta. That was a wonderful sort of a roadmap towards net zero. Now I'm going to request Mr. Nitin Prasad to also give his thoughts on a pathway to net zero.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Actually, it would be difficult for me to add much to what the comments have already been done so well by the rest of the panelists. I think I'll only sort of come back and suggest that we do need to, as Suchar was actually coming back and mentioning, we do need to take a much more of a sectoral orientation to how we go back into developing the solutions as we get there. I think there is a sense that there's silver bullets, and I fully agree by Lavnish in terms of what he's saying, but because you need the tools, you need technologies, you need services, solutions, capacity building. A lot needs to happen, financing that needs to come with it, and technology-wise, there's no silver bullets to come and build out. I think there's a lot that needs to sort of come and be done. One of the things that I do feel quite optimistic about is, in the end, we have demonstrated actually tremendous change and capacity for change over the last 5 to 10 years. If you really think about the electrification program that has been conducted, it has been very extensive. And the rate of change of electrification, especially in the renewable energy space, has been tremendous. And today we see an even faster acceleration of that as you go forward. So there's clear line of sight in terms of what we can come back and do in that space. The transition in the mobility space feels slow to some of us, but let's not forget that it took Norway 15, 20 years to figure out, how they were going to come back and solve some of their electric challenges. And they're a much smaller country. So a lot fewer cars and vehicles also, but you look at the pace of that discussion that's happening right now, incredible sort of momentum to come back and get there. So I think there is, across the industries, I think we continue to surprise ourselves in terms of how fast we can come back and make the transition. I think we continue to surprise ourselves that there is economic ways for us to come back and do this, and innovations that we can come back and deploy and scale, especially in our context and together. So I remain quite optimistic. So maybe I'll end there and give the audience a chance to ask some questions.
Yeah, but before we get to the audience, I just going to ask each of you the same one question. If you can please be as concise as you possibly can be. So if each of you can identify one barrier to achieving net zero and offer a possible solution to it. And can we start with Mr. Puwada?
So getting one is so difficult. There's so many things, and it's such an emerging field. And when I try to look from a biotechnology perspective, I think I'd like to say that we have one earth, we have whatever we want to do, achieve is from this one earth. Now, I think when we look into the future, it is about trying to get, I'd like to introduce three Fs: more food, more fuel, more fiber. And all the three, if we turn it into a sustainable way, I think it's a very, very clear enabler. Now, more food, definitely when we look ahead, the population is going to grow. We have the same earth, which also means that can we identify new ways of growing with less chemical usage and bringing in more biology into the agriculture part? That's the food, the one F. The second F that I would like to talk about is the fuel. And I think what, from a historical perspective, is that we have typically run on fossil. The future is bio-based. Can we think in terms of more biofuels? And for every 1 liter of biofuel that gets generated, the whole ecosystem around the farmers, the industry, additional job creation, all of that is also a clear enabler. The third one is in terms of fiber, which is also an important element in a lot of industries. When we look at all of these three things, one thing which is common is that newer futuristic technologies in terms of biology, biotech can actually be a guiding light. With that, I'd like to thank Godrej for this opportunity in the CII.
Yeah. Dr. Chanana?
Thank you once again. I believe one challenge that I can highlight is while what Nitin said is absolutely correct, that we have been surprising ourselves with the kind of achievements that we have made, we still remain interfaced with each other. We are still not integrated with each other in terms of the effort. And I think this journey from being interfaced to integrated in terms of the efforts is what is going to fast track our way to the net zero. The developments are still, and we have seen during the times of emergencies and difficult times, we do show a strong resilience and we come together as one integrated unit and perform. I think structurally, if we are somehow able to create this integration layer through technology or through structure, that would be a big push. Now, how do we do that? I think there is a programmatic approach that probably will, and public policy, we have, I studied this approach called NATO, that is nodality, authority, treasure, and organization. Nodality, that is, we need to be very, very pushy on creating the awareness and capacity building, with everybody. I think everybody talks and then there is a tendency to forget. In terms of authority, the regulatory landscape and the regulatory requirements are actually coming in big way, and that movement is definitely quite visible. The third is subsidizing. That's from the treasurer, and incentivizing, whether it's through unicorns or through others. And fourth, to me, what we did today in terms of CCUS, the organization structure, including task force, etc., to actually integrate. And if empowered groups of the COVID management at NITI Aayog level was any example, I think these have been shown to be working. So to summarize, if we are able to somehow create holistic integration of what each one of us is doing, that would be a real accelerator for our approach to net zero.
Thank you. Mr. Sengupta?
Thank you. I think to me, balancing sustainability with inclusiveness, that's the important aspect. So, it's great examples that Krishna was giving around biotech and, agriculture. We've got 15 crore farmers in the country. All of this we're saying ultimately needs to increase the money in the hands of in the farmers' hands. Right? So the one example is if we say, generating carbon credits from agriculture and forestry, and that somehow needs to make initiatives and projects viable and also put more money in the farmers' pockets. Or I take the example of let's say transportation, where our transporters have very, very fragmented base. We have transporters who have one truck, two trucks, five trucks. So for them to, transform to, EV or to hydrogen based, it's a big jump. Making credit available to them and then making sure that it actually makes sense to them. So creating those models which are specific to India, which makes sense to everyone, and its sustainability is not at the cost of inclusion. I think that's the barrier we need to cross.
Thank you. So, Nitin, if you would take this question on in terms of barriers and possible solutions, and then I'm going to request you to moderate the rest of the session with the audience.
Sure, happy to do that. I must say I was debating in my mind because whether to also go down 3-4 of them on the list and choosing between lifestyle changes and demand drivers, which of course is a big area for us to come back and think about. But then I was sort of reminded very much of my grandfather's time and his 25-year-old Fiat and keeping that thing on the road constantly, and it felt like we have so much history in terms of circularity and being able to come back and do that I felt like that was a bit of a easier one. The one I wanted to choose was actually carbon markets and carbon pricing and consistency actually in carbon markets and carbon pricing. And I think we have had a little bit of a knee-jerk approach to pricing carbon, and because we do price carbon in India, it's hidden away in pollution taxes and cap and trades and other sort of mechanisms and all that's there. But if we don't come back and have a consistent approach across all the different sectors and create the transparency, I think we will create a very big ceiling, not even a glass ceiling, because there will be no way for us to actually punch our way through without having some way of operating. And if I look at my forward models and valuation models, that extend out 10, 15, 20, for us actually about 30 to 40 years, if I can't come back and price in carbon and carbon implications into how we do business today, then it is severely going to start limiting how we actually even look at which geography and where we can come back and make investment decisions. And that's so that's the one I wanted to choose.
Great.
Let me take the mantle baton, if you will.
If you can request the audience for a few questions and then offer them to the panel.
Sure. I see a number of hands. Maybe we'll start from front to back. Would you like to go first?
Just wondering, because the interest rates in India are very, very high compared to Japan or many other developed countries, will it not be very difficult the scheme which works for others may be difficult for us with our high interest rate, 10, 20%. What is your take on that? And what mechanisms? Because many businesses may be struggling with making even minimum profits. And then on top of it, trying to go for long-term sustainability, carbon reduction and all that aspect.
So I think it's a great question, and I'll ask maybe Sujoy to answer that. But maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll go across the table. So we have one hand that way. I think should we go on that side of the room, please?
Good evening. I think I like the discussion a lot. And I am Pushpendra Johri from RMSI. We do a lot of work in the sustainability space. So my question is primarily to you, Nitin. With the CCUS getting created, what are your what are the key areas that you are going to focus on to start with? Because the carbon extraction is still, the technology is there, but it's not cheap. So is the focus going to be more technology focused, finding out alternative ways of carbon extraction, or maybe you would like to take a different route because there is also a big financing angle associated to the same problem? And just one question more to Sujoy. Is your report also going by sector? Because net carbon, net zero pathway is different for different sectors. So that's all. Thank you.
I think there was one more on that table over there, and then we'll come back around. Sorry, I saw your hand. We'll just take three, and then we'll come back around again.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Tarun. I'm the founder of Green Jams, and I want to start with supreme appreciation for Nitin. Just one small conversation, and then it sparked into an amazing, discussion with your team. And I'm amazed at the sort of resources that your team has been putting in and having these discussions with us. One of the best ways to actually go forward in the spirit of partnership is obviously partnerships, which is the best way to essentially also get to net zero. It's a question to everyone, including Mr. Godrej, on identifying what are the different partnerships that you guys are exploring, and if you could put a line on what it looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And by the way, he's he's the founder of Green Bricks, which is a fantastic solution. We've been very happily been using them. Why don't we go across the table? Sudhir, do you want to take the mic?
Yeah, I'll go with the easy one first. The question on the work. Yes, it is. Our work is very much sectorized because the story is very different. And even in places like cement, you don't actually reach net zero. So many others you're reaching much further. So power, steel, cement, automotive, agriculture, and then cross-cutting enablers like CCUS and hydrogen, etc. So I look forward to sharing the report with everyone. I think the question on capital is a very important one. So while the total amount of capital required, it's staggeringly huge. We're talking about a GDP, India's GDP of 3.5 trillion today, and the total requirement is 4x of that in a situation where capital is scarce and the cost of capital is relatively higher in India. So we look at it that there is a huge amount of capital globally that's getting reallocated from more conventional like oil and gas and other areas where these used to take up a lot of capital. If you see over the last 10 to 20 years amount of capital that was deployed in oil and gas or coal-based power, a lot of that is getting reallocated. Now, much of that capital is coming from lower interest rate regimes, right? Of course, given the exchange rate risk, etc., there's a premium that that capital will see. You won't get a yen-denominated loan in India, but I think this is where the innovation between public sector and private sector come in, right? So where creating innovative structures of contracts which reduce the risk. So if you say that, solar at one time 17 rupees, it's come down to 2 rupees. And one of the reasons is that the design of the PPS has improved and the risk for the investors and developers has reduced. Therefore the premium they charge is reduced. So there's innovation that one can do around that. Innovation one can do around structuring of the debt. Innovation around the length and duration and tenure. The interesting ones in the carbon credit space, we've seen there are companies abroad who are, if you're doing a forestry project and you're going to generate carbon credits over the next 30 years, they will come and say, I'll take all your carbon credits over the next 30 years. In turn, I will give you some money upfront today. And that improves the investment economics of the project. There's an interesting sustainable bond where there's, you have an interest payment coupon and you have that and a carbon credit coupon, and both of them are traded separately. So maybe it's a 3% interest rate with carbon credit coupon, and the lender can then securitize both at the same time. So there's a lot of innovation that's possible, right? And I think I don't have a silver bullet answer, but many such green shoots which give us optimism that it can be done.
Thanks, Sujoy. And I'll just come to Lavneesh and Krishna on the partnerships point. But the only other thing I'd add is the secondary debt market is actually pretty essential for any of this infrastructure development. And what we've seen time and time again, to your point on interest rates, is cycling of debt from first commercial to a secondary market and per se even a third market where pension funds, hedge funds, and all can come in, is actually pretty essential to get the cost of borrowing down and get the interest rates down. And there's early green shoots, if you will, of some thinking on that space, but we really need that to develop to really go forward. On the point on CCUS, it's a great question, and normally I answer the question by saying yes, 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 and yes. So we have to do all of it, so because there's such a long list of things to come back and do. But I guess one thing I will say is, we did Quest in Canada, which is about 6-7 years ago, and this was in partnership with the Canadian government, and we're sinking in upwards of a couple 100 million tons every year. A couple 100,000 tons every year. And I think what we learned and what the government learned and what collectively we've understood about what it takes to do, for example, CCS, was absolutely essential in terms of framing how Canada and the US and all could actually go forward in terms of market. So if I had to give you one answer, I think the answer is, for me, the most important thing is that we really need to get on with it and stop talking and start actually get a plant, pilot, demonstration, whatever it is, on the ground. Because I think what we will learn from that will help to shape how we can take the industry forward and execute that. Would you guys like to talk about the partnership point?
Okay, so just before that, you raised a very important point about the interest rates and all. I think what you mentioned is how do I remain profitably sustainable? I think the larger thinking is also towards how can I be sustainably profitable also, right? So that's the point, and that's the thinking that I wanted to propose. Sustainability also offers an opportunity for innovation in terms of process and to some extent cost control, which could give a competitive advantage, while it's not a solution to what the question that you said. On the partnerships, I don't know whether I have fully understood the question, but if it is industry-government partnerships or industry-industry partnerships, we have tried a series of experiments in this country between one company to government partnerships, between associations like this to government partnerships on knowledge sharing platforms like CCUS or this. We have got multiple experiences of varied success rate and varied but the key area that ships can actually work, and that is where should be the main contribution in my view, is the creation of the whole ecosystem around the main area. And the challenge that I have seen in many of these partnerships is when we want an outcome at the beginning of the partnerships. So if we create the ecosystem in the longer term, that focus can actually result in some level of gain that we are in the end looking for. So in terms of partnership, the key requirement to me is have a mindset of enabling ecosystem, and then the results will follow, rather than the other way around, that if this is the result, what can I do the partnership? That to me would be a larger prescription.
Just building on to Lavnish point, the ecosystem, I think it's a very, very important part. So we need to invest, we need to create, and we also need to make sure that we fund it accordingly, enable mentorship opportunities, and also share good practices from the rest of the world. It's an evolving field. The entire field of decarbonization is something which is more future oriented. It's evolving, and as things evolve, new insights, new things are coming. So what do we do? I think if we have a plan, if we have a few roadmaps and a few scenarios, then the ecosystem, be it in terms of industry, government, academia, think tanks, all of that, if we are able to come up with a plan and then with a dedicated focus, invest on future-oriented things, I think our ability to future-proof and get success better will be accelerated.
Great. Thank you very much. I know I've been told very carefully that we have no more time, but I know there are a few more questions, but perhaps you could come up to us afterwards and we'll answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nitin, and all of the panelists for their thoughts. And we look forward to the next panel. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude this session. We thank our distinguished